Welcome to Battleground NYC, the fight for your vote, where we're covering the all-important New York City mayoral race for the next 14 weeks. Why? Because it's the thing that everyone's talking about. We're going to talk about what it means for the Democrats, what it means for the midterms, what it means for Trump and Republicans. All eyes are on New York City, and we've got it all covered right here. I'm SC Cup. Let's get started. Later in today's show, we're going to talk about what this race is telling Democrats all over the country, but and also what one MAGA star is saying about Mamdani's rise. That's really interesting. But first, let's get to the latest news from the campaign trail. Joining me now is Morgan McKay. She's a political reporter for Fox 5 News New York. Welcome, Morgan.
Thank you so much for having me. I see you're doing a great job with the show. I appreciate it.
Oh, thanks. And thanks for coming on. We count on reporters like you who are literally in the field on the campaign trail telling us what's going on. Speaking of, you were at candidate events today. Tell me what you heard and what you saw.
So today I was out with Zohran Mamdani, the Democratic nominee for this mayor's race, and he had with him Senator Elizabeth Warren. And together they were talking about not only affordability in New York City, but also universal childcare. That's been one of Mamdani's platforms. He wants to implement universal childcare for kids 6 weeks old to 5 years old. And he said that he would pay for that by taxing billionaires, increasing the tax on billionaires. That would, of course, need support from Albany. And Governor Kathy Hochul has said she's not going to be raising taxes. However, the Speaker of the Assembly, Carl Hastie, has kind of mentioned in the past that he would maybe be willing to negotiate on this or at least talk about it. But it would be a heavy lift to do something like this. But Mamdani says by getting people universal child care, that would be able to allow for moms and dads to be able to go to work and to ease that burden on them. Now, on the other side of it, we also had former Governor Andrew Cuomo. He had an event today, and it was his first press conference since he lost the primary by double digits. And he really wanted to hammer home what he thinks is a weakness for Zohran Mamdani, and that is law enforcement. He really went home putting up, you'll remember back in 2020 when Cuomo was on everybody's TVs during the height of COVID, and he had those PowerPoints, and you could tell that's really where he feels the most comfortable. And today he did a little PowerPoint, and it was his first press conference post the primary loss, and he threw up former posts that Zohran Mamdani made about defund the police and other comments that he's made about law enforcement. Now, since Mamdani has launched his campaign and since he's received some of those critiques, he said really clearly today that, last week, he said very clearly that he is not going to be defunding the police, and he is not going to be implementing, or he doesn't agree with many of those messages that he said back in 2020, a little bit inadvertently apologizing for some of those comments while saying that's not who he is or who he has been on the campaign trail so far. But Cuomo today coming out with sort of proposals saying he would give like a sign-on bonus to cops, retention bonus to cops, and boost their pay as well as hire additional officers. I also asked Mamdani today, who wants to cut overtime for police officers. He said it's been a huge burden. I said, well, if you cut overtime, are you then going to raise the salary of police officers? Because many are forced to work overtime because of the low salary that many get, especially entering salary. Right. But Mamdani said that's something he's willing to have a conversation about. He sort of dodged a question a little bit. But Cuomo said that, he's never been the one to say defund the police, and this is what he wants. However, if you remember back in 2020, not only did he say the defund the police movement was a legitimate school of thought, he also threatened local police departments that he was going to pull state funding if they did not sit down with communities and come up with certain reforms that they were forced to implement. Now, if you ask him what those reforms are, I can guarantee he cannot name a single one of them, because that was kind of one of the biggest complaints about this sort of roundtable these police departments were forced to have with their communities at the time, is that there was no real reform that came out of it. They just sort of sat down and implemented sort of small things, maybe at least open the door for a conversation.
So interesting. It sounds like Andrew Cuomo is kind of running a Republican campaign against Zohran Mamdani, because maybe that's the only lane he can occupy now. Mamdani is collecting endorsements. Mike Gianaris, the state Senate deputy majority leader who represents Western Queens, he's throwing his support behind Mamdani. Tish James, the New York State Attorney General, has endorsed him. He's got endorsements from climate groups like Sunrise Movement and Third Act. How important are these endorsements in New York City?
So union endorsements, I mean, if you look at the primary, for example, the union endorsements, a lot of them went to Andrew Cuomo at the time. A lot of them saw him as an invincible force, and it didn't really help him that much in the primary. But what the unions can provide is sort of an apparatus, meaning they can go and send out workers on his
Canvas.
exactly.
And, yeah.
And on the other side of this, though, how much do some of these endorsements matter? You know, maybe not too much. The Tish James, Attorney General Tish James, her endorsement was unique in the sense that she is sort of becoming a liaison, according to my sources, between Mamdani and some of these business community groups. She's also been urging Mamdani to keep Jessica Tisch as a police commissioner. According to my sources, she's been trying to urge him privately as sort of a way to kind of alleviate some of these concerns from business leaders right now who maybe are worried about his impact on public safety. But as far as some of the other endorsements, maybe not so much. On the flip side of that, you know, Chuck Schumer, Senator Chuck Schumer, Governor Kathy Hochul, you know, they aren't endorsing Mamdani just yet. But according to one of my sources who works in the Mamdani campaign, they were saying, you know, how much does, you know, Schumer's endorsement really matter, especially since his favorability is so low in New York?
Yeah, maybe Mamdani doesn't want it. And, you know, maybe these more sort of establishment Dems like Kathy Hochul, Chuck Schumer. I'm not sure I'd put Hakeem Jeffries in an establishment category, but he also has not endorsed. Maybe sometimes Mamdani's like, I'm good without them. We'll see.
And Governor Kathy,
all of these guys do have a Republican challenger, Curtis Lewa. We'll talk to him later in the week. But this weekend, he got something money can't buy, a big New York Times profile that takes him very seriously. And if you know Curtis Lewa, as I have for years and years and years, if you live in the city, he did something surprising. He's taken off the beret. He's taken off the Guardian Angels jacket. He's put on a suit. Is it time to take Curtis Lewa seriously?
So Curtis Lewa, as you mentioned, he's been a fixture in New York City politics and in New York City in general, especially with that red beret. But he did run in 2021 pretty unsuccessfully. Right now, some people do think he has maybe a better shot than others because right now the anti-Mamdani vote is going to be so split between Cuomo and Adams. Both are trying to push Mayor Eric Adams. Both are trying to push the other one out. But as it stands right now, neither of these two are going to be dropping out of the race, and they will both definitely be at least on the ballot. So there's a chance that, you know, the anti-Mamdani vote and the pro-Mamdani vote, Democrats will be so split that Curtis Lewa could see an edge here. It's hard to say. At this point, we're still 3 months away from the election, but at the same time, there's just not as many Republicans as there are Democrats in New York City. There's even more, I believe there's even more independents than there are Republicans.
Yeah, that sounds right. Okay, before we let you go, also new today, Democrats in Staten Island, the city's conservative-ish borough, have endorsed Mamdani. This is after they supported Andrew Cuomo in the primary. What do you make of that?
I think we're seeing that from almost everybody kind of right now in New York City that was endorsing Cuomo in the primary, now dropping him and either endorsing Mayor Eric Adams or Mamdani because Cuomo's favorability is so low in New York City. I think people really saw that in the primary. And so now they're just trying to find someone new. And especially since if the tea leaves are looking like Mamdani is the favorite to win at this point. So many are just trying to get in, I feel like, at the ground floor right now, too, saying, you know what, we're endorsing you, we're supporting you because we think you're probably going to win.
I mean, yeah, this is not the ground floor. They're getting in sort of halfway. And what I heard it described, at least in Staten Island, is this is sort of a shotgun wedding between the Democrats there and Zohran Mamdani. It's all really interesting stuff. Morgan McKay from Fox 5, thanks so much for your reporting and for bringing us all of that context from the trail.
It was great to be on. Thank you.
Okay, great. Up next, the bigger picture. What Democrats nationwide are saying and doing about Mamdani. And a MAGA star weighs in. But is it sincere? We'll be right back with more Battleground New York City, the fight for your vote. We're back with Battleground New York City, the fight for your vote, where we're following the New York City mayoral election with a laser focus. Joining me now to discuss the bigger picture is John Avlon, a true Renaissance man, as he's a former New York congressional candidate, author, a journalist, chairman of Citizens Union, an organization working to reform New York City and state government. He's also a longtime friend and colleague of mine. Welcome, John.
Great to see you, Essie.
Great as always to see you. Before we broaden out, I want to talk to you about something I talked to Morgan McKay about, Tish James versus Kathy Hochul, Hakeem Jeffries, Chuck Schumer. You know these figures. You live in New York. Tish James now has a contentious relationship with Andrew Cuomo. So we'll take all of her endorsement for Mamdani with a grain of salt. It's no surprise. The others haven't weighed in yet. What are Hochul and Jeffries and Schumer waiting for, do you think?
Well, I think that a lot of, Governor Hochul and Hakeem Jeffries and Chuck Schumer, they have a strained relationship with the DSA, the Democratic Socialists of America. That's not the face of the party they would like to put forward nationally or statewide. It's not helpful politically. And they've got legitimate disagreements on policy as well as experience. So, it's not news, I think, that, local Democratic Party, apparatuses from counties are endorsing the Democratic nominee. Tish James is a bridging figure, I think a very important one for him. But as you say, there's a lot of bad blood with Andrew Cuomo. The other figures need to weigh the positive versus the negative, which is Mamdani is going to be used against Democrats in a lot of swing districts. And while he did win the Democratic primary handily, it was a closed Democratic primary, and he won with less than 10% of the total registered voters of New York. So they're thinking bigger picture, speaking of big picture.
Yeah, and aside from Hochul, Jeffries and Schumer are also national Democratic figures, right? They're not just talking to New York the way Kathy Hochul is. So we'll wait and see on them. Mark Penn and Andrew Stein, two sort of old school Dems, had an op-ed in the right-leaning Wall Street Journal yesterday. This was the headline: Andrew Cuomo can still save New York City. The former governor is vastly preferable to Mamdani and more popular than Adams. Wow, lots to unpack there. Does Cuomo have enough of that kind of support among Democrats in New York City to close the gap in the polls? And does that kind of support help him?
Look, the problem is this is not a binary choice that voters are getting in this general election. It's why we should have open primaries and ranked choice voting in general elections. You are likely to have a mayor that doesn't get 50%. Now, maybe Mamdani, crosses that threshold barely, but the opposition to Mamdani is divided between the incumbent mayor, Eric Adams, Andrew Cuomo, former governor, Jim Walden, and Curtis Sliwa, the Republican nominee. That makes it almost mathematically impossible for any one person to topple him unless the others drop out, which there's been some talk of, but little indication that'll actually happen. If we were down to one candidate, I think you'd have a very competitive general election. And Andrew Cuomo has very high name ID and indeed did very well with the African-American community in New York in the primary, did well in a lot in both the Bronx and Staten Island, two, boroughs that are typically on opposite extremes politically. But I don't think that an Andrew Stein and Mark Penn op-ed is likely to tip him over the top with the Wall Street Journal.
No offense to Mark and Andrew.
No offense.
But is there a reason? I thought it was interesting that they gave it to the Wall Street Journal, right? Like, what did you make of that?
Yeah, look, I think that frequently Mark Penn writes with Doug Schoen, and they're sort of, Fox News' favorite Democrats. And I have no problem with centrist Democrats. I am a centrist Democrat myself. But I think very often they sort of take the Fox talking point and echo it across News Corp. That's sort of.
But is it a bid, do you think, to get some Republicans who, no offense to Curtis Sliwa, might not feel like they have someone in this race that they can get behind? Do you think that's the play for some of these establishment Dems?
Look, I think that's sort of the underlying dynamic here. As you well know, New York City historically has elected a Republican mayor around every 25 years. This goes This is Fiorello LaGuardia, John Lindsay, Rudy Giuliani. And that's a sort of check on Democratic Party, one party state or city, in this case, excesses. But you don't have that typical safety valve, that release valve anymore as the Republican Party has moved further and further right, especially under Donald Trump. And so Curtis Sliwa is polling around, less than 15%. That's not enough to topple him. And so I think Andrew Cuomo has sort of, support on the center left, the center, and even some folks who are center right. So I think that's the calculus at play, and it's not a crazy one for all the baggage he brings. It's not crazy calculus, but it's like sometimes I feel like it's math I can't do. It's like this is like, it's a weird race, but it's what makes it so fun to cover and interesting. Should the Democratic Party want to nationalize this race? Do they want Mamdani as the face of the party in places like Michigan and Georgia, where Democrats are trying to compete in midterm elections? The answer is obviously no. Okay. No, not even a little bit. And this is the issue. Look, it takes two wings to fly. And people like Bernie Sanders and AOC can get a lot of energy and traction. And the issue of affordability is one that is not left-right. That is something everyone should be focused on. Right. But the fundamental fact is that someone from the far left doesn't help win over swing voters generally. And AOC and Bernie Sanders have legislative positions. This is the definitive executive office. And so it's a totally different skill set. And that's why concerns about his politics and policy are one thing, but his also experience is another legitimate concern. This is someone who's never worked in the private sector, never run a large organization. New York City has over 300,000 employees. And so it is a definitively an executive position. So no, Democrats should be focusing on Mikey Sherrill in New Jersey, Abigail Spanberger in Virginia. Right. Incredibly talented center-left folks running for governor in states that those are, I think, the real news out of this cycle should be more attention on them, less on Mamdani. Maybe in the Alyssa Slotkin model, right? Absolutely. But that's such an important distinction. That Mamdani is unlike AOC in that it's an executive position. And so his experience matters and the policy prescriptions he's offering matters more. Stay right there, John. There's a lot more I want to get to with you. Battleground NYC, the fight for your vote. We'll be right back. We're back here on Battleground NYC, the fight for your vote. One more time with John Avlon, chairman of Citizens Union. John, you ran a great campaign out on Long Island last year. You were the Democratic nominee, but you eventually lost to the MAGA candidate, Nick LaLota. Most people think of New York as liberal because the city usually votes Democrat, but not always. As you mentioned, we've had Republican mayors. You used to work for Rudy Giuliani. Yep. When he was mayor, and there are Republican pockets in places like Staten Island and obviously out on Long Island where you ran. I've been saying recently, yes, New York City is liberal, but it's not Portland liberal. Ken Mamdani, is he too far left for New York? We know what he did in the primary, but in a general, is he just too far left for New York? You know the state. Well, certainly for the state. I mean, the question is the city. But again, this is why I think it's a fundamental mistake to treat the Democratic primary as the general election. We have closed partisan primaries. 80% of major American cities have some form of nonpartisan or open primary. And the organization I'm chairman of, Citizens Union of New York, has been pushing for open primaries. Mamdani had a decisive win over a former governor, but he still got less than 10% of all registered voters. That is not a mandate. And I think a lot of the ideas he's advanced are much further to the left or more ideological than anything we've seen in the mayor's office. And the reality is that the job of mayor is essentially to be a non-ideological problem solver. As Fiorello LaGuardia famously said, there's no Democrat or Republican way to clean up the streets. And at the end of the day, mayors have three jobs. And I worked in City Hall, as you said. You got to keep crime low, quality of life high, and the tax base growing. So if your ideas run counter to that, you got a problem. We're seeing a problem in Chicago, for example, with a mayor who's profoundly unpopular, who represents the extreme progressive wing. So look, crime doesn't have a constituency. I think New York, all stereotypes break down upon much closer inspection, and that's whether that's San Francisco recalling its school board for trying to, do an ideological renaming of schools, removing its DA. So I think you've got, what would normally be a very competitive general election, except the opposition to Mamdani is split four ways. And I think that's likely to have a non-representative outcome. I think it'll be difficult for the next mayor and for the city, particularly if they're imposing an ideological agenda, if they don't have majority support. And I think you win elections by seizing the center, but you got to do it with authenticity and definitely a focus on affordability. And those are the two things he did brilliantly in his primary. He deserves a lot of credit.
Check. Affordability, authenticity, check. He's got some other issues, but those he's got. Former presidential candidate, MAGA star, current Ohio gubernatorial candidate, Vivek Ramaswamy, remember him? He was on Fox and Friends this morning, and he was warning that Mamdani and other progressive candidates like Omar Feta in Minneapolis are a threat to the country. He said, my advice to Republicans across the country is this is our chance to actually offer the vision to make the case for why free enterprise, why capitalism is the best system known to the history of man. Now, first, is this good advice for Republicans? Is this the opportunity to unite around a pro-capitalist message?
I mean, last time I checked, the president of the United States, a Republican, is pursuing protectionist policies and trade wars with allies.
Yes, he did. Yes,
good luck with that, right? I mean, look, I believe, I'm writing an essay right now called "In Defense of Liberal Capitalist Democracy." I think liberal capitalist democracy is a great system, but it comes from the center, not from the extremes. So Ramaswamy is, look, Republicans want to run against Zohran Mamdani.
Right.
Donald Trump wants Zohran Mamdani to be mayor of New York, to use as a foil. He's not throwing his support behind Curtis Sliwa. He wants that because the polarization enables the extremes. And that's the game here that people need to get hip to. That's what they need to understand about the underlying dynamics. So look, our friend Errol Lewis has a great line where he says that Mamdani actually is the things that Tea Party Republicans accuse Barack Obama of being, right?
Yes.
He's born in Africa, a socialist, and a Muslim, right? He's actually those things, none of which are bad or disqualifying, but obviously they tried to demonize Barack Obama along those entirely fictitious grounds. And you can easily see this is a political figure who's going to be used as a foil nationally, even apparently in Ohio.
You know what's so funny? Errol said that on our show, and it was a great point, and it made me think. This is not completely symmetrical, but it made me think. And Donald Trump is the thing that Democrats accused Mitt Romney of being. Right? Democrats said Mitt Romney was this sexist monster. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. But
fair point.
Republicans want Democrats to nationalize this New York City race, and that will work in some places. The places where, people want to go to AOC and Bernie rallies, and among Democrats who say this is where the energy is. There is no energy in the middle, in the establishment. You might want there to be, but there isn't. To people who say there isn't energy in the center right now, we got to go with people like Mamdani, AOC. What do you say?
I'd say that's absolutely wrong, but it does take a clear and compelling candidate who's got an ability to communicate clearly. I think the vital center is where the energy is and where it should be and where the vast majority of Americans and, in fact, New Yorkers are. But it can't be a stale defense of a failed status quo. I think the center left needs to be the reform party, in effect, in New York City and New York State. It needs to take on the extremes and propose things that address fundamental challenges, to take big swings. I think the authenticity and affordability are key issues, but how you solve that should be the great debate. And I don't believe in putting party over country. I don't believe in putting party over principles. If you want to deal with affordability, let's figure out how to harness market forces, not fight them. That's a good debate. And that's a totally legitimate debate for us to have in this general election. And so I just think it's an issue of candidates, generational change. And I do think that, people in the center can't be seen as defenders of the status quo, and we need more conviction and passion from the vital center. That's what'll make a difference for folks.
Quickly before we go, is Andrew Cuomo the person to deliver that sort of center-left message?
Look, Andrew Cuomo is the most experienced candidate ever to run for mayor of New York. And Mamdani is the least experienced. It's quite a mashup. But I do think there's, he ran a Rose Garden strategy, and you need that authenticity and focus on affordability. And the best defense is a good offense.
John Avlon, thanks so much for being here. I'm sure we'll have you back.
Anytime, my friend. Be well.
We'll see you back here tomorrow and every day, Monday through Friday, for more in-depth conversation, context, and reporting right here on Battleground, New York City, the fight for your vote.